Welcome to Church Pulse Weekly. It's Carey Nieuwhof here, and I am thrilled to be joined by Joe Jensen, who is the Vice President of Church Engagement at Barna. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, Carey, great to be on with you today.
Well, the big secret is you've been a part of every single episode of Church Pulse Weekly since we launched this about a year and a half ago, but it's the first time you've actually been on camera or on mic. So you've been the executive producer of this show, along with Aaron Ward from my team. And today you are filling us in on some of the things Barna's been working at. So it's a joy to be with you, Joe.
Yeah, it's been a privilege, Carey, and just say you and your team have been awesome to work with. And man, what a journey we've been on the last 15 or so months trying to help the church navigate what's going on with COVID.
Yeah. And it went from minute by minute, almost like election night vibe of like cascading news and crises in 2020 to almost, I would say, a more chronic situation today. So yeah, things are reopening. The world isn't wide open yet, but much of America is, and that's where the bulk of this audience is. And so we want to come alongside church leaders and just give them meaningful data. And it's almost like, I don't want to say we're through the crisis, because I think that's probably a little optimistic depending on where you are or who you are. However, we're staring at a different set of reality. And so we're thrilled to have Jeff Henderson, who will be joining us in just a minute. A lot of you know Jeff Henderson. For years, he was at North Point Church. He was leader of Buckhead Church, planted Gwinnett Church and Hamilton Mill Church. And then in late 2020, he stepped away from that to move full-time into the For Company. And he has an amazing book about being known what you're for. And if you've ever seen the hashtag For initiative anywhere businesses use it, churches use it around the globe, but across America. Well, that was Jeff Henderson, actually, who came up with that idea a few years ago. So we're going to talk about things with Jeff. But one of the things we pulled on recently at Barna, Joe, is that we're seeing that the perception that church leaders have of themselves and the community has of church leaders are a little bit different. So you've got some fresh data for us. Can you walk us through that as we think about what's ahead as church leaders?
Yeah, certainly, Carey. Yeah, and we were recently able to kick off this new data journey with our partner Glue, where we're going into cities all around the country. We started with 4 cities: Kansas City, Columbus, Dallas, Fort Worth, and then South Florida. And we wanted to get down on the city level, but as we did city research, we also wanted to float up to the national level. And so what we're going to share with you today are just a few stats from the national research we did. And we started with, as people are going back into church, we wanted to know, how did COVID shape or reshape people's perceptions of churches? So as we look to the future of the church, it's really important for us to really stop and consider, how do people view the church? How do they understand the church's role within a city and across the country? And so one of the things we wanted to hammer down on is, like, what are the primary reactions of the local church? So just, very simply, positive, indifferent, or negative. And what we found across the country is that 44% of US adults perceive the church as positive, which I think can be celebrated.
Which is
right?
Good news, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then that should be celebrated, that the church hasn't diminished in its, the positive impact and perception it's having across the country. However, we also wanted to look at, how do people view the church in terms of indifference or negativity? And this is where I really want us to press in a little bit for our audience. 31% of US adults have an indifferent view of the church, and then 25% have a negative view. And so really, as you look at those 3 things, I think you can choose as a leader where to zoom in. And I think there's different insights depending on where you want to zoom. What I'd like to do is focus us in on the indifference part, because I think we're seeing in this very polarized society in which we live, that indifference is kind of setting in, and maybe in a concerning way. I think as church leaders, we need to really pay attention to, is the church really blending in with every other institution in this country? And how do people perceive, is the church really making a positive impact, or are they just kind of blending in with every other voice, every other institution?
It's a great question. Can you just refresh, because this is brand new data, is that like 44% of unchurched people, or just the general population, including those who go to church?
It's general population. Yeah.
So general population. Yeah. So that includes churchgoers. If you were to double click on that and look at unchurched people, the indifference theoretically could be higher. But 44%, it's interesting, I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, but they say it's better if people dislike you than they're indifferent to you. You know what I mean? Because at least there's an emotion there. I don't know whether that's true or not in the case of the course, or the church rather. But I would say, living in Canada, which has been more post-Christian for longer, indifference would be the number one. It's like, oh, I remember I was talking to a national reporter a few years ago for one of our TV networks, and he's like, oh, like people actually still go to church, right? Like, are you kidding me? That sounds so quaint. And like he had no idea that they weren't all antique shops or whatever. It's just that, oh yeah, you guys are over there doing that thing. Oh, okay, whatever, right? Which is different. So what do you see in the data, Joe?
Yeah, as we double click a little bit, as we talk about quote unquote brand perceptions, which I know a lot of people look at, that term brand and they don't like it to be associated with the church. But I actually think it's really good when you understand brand simply as, like when people, hear about you or see you or see the name of your church, what do they think of and what emotions come to the surface? And so we asked people to respond to a variety of different views of the church. And what we saw on the positive side is that 74% of U.S. adults perceive the church as an institution that offers hope to people. So that's really encouraging. And I think especially, in a culture of so much despair and polarity and, lack of hope, I think it kind of shows that people are still clinging to hope. They still want hope. And I think they're looking to the church to provide that. On the negative view, the number one negative view that people shared, 44% said that the church is known for things they are against rather than things they are for. And that really grabbed my attention as a former pastor, Carey. And I know it probably does you, as we look at social media and we look at all the different voices and the influences that we have in social media. It doesn't surprise me that the church is really, for over almost a half of people in the United States really view the church as something they're against versus something they're for, something I think we really need to pay attention to as church leaders.
Well, I'm excited to talk to Jeff Henderson about that. And, that kind of goes back to the groundbreaking book that David Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons released, what was it, 14 years ago now, right? Where Unchristian, where they talked about just how negative a perception younger generations have of Christianity, that they see it as homophobic and angry and distanced and prejudiced and so on and so forth, which I think came as a real shock then, but the story hasn't changed a lot by the sounds of it. Anything else in the data, Joe?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. Actually, that was a really influential book for me as a young pastor, Unchristian, Carey. I mean, it was like groundbreaking in so many ways. And actually, we wanted to bring up some of those things that David did talk about in that book. And, judgmental and irrelevant to me, hypocritical, some of those views we actually brought up in this research as well. And we saw that, 37% of U.S. adults view the church as judgmental. 36 as irrelevant to me, and then 33% is hypocritical. And then when you look at how generations perceive that, we definitely see that millennials and Gen Xers, but especially millennials, have a higher negative view, have more so of a negative view of the church than older generations.
Yeah, I remember looking at the data, and generally boomers had the most positive view of the church, followed by Gen X, followed by millennials. And this one didn't really pull Gen Z, this sampling, but yeah, that's really interesting. So basically what that says is you've got a microcosm of the next generation coming up, and they're a little less favorable toward the church, which is, it just, to me, it's self-awareness, Joe. I don't know how you see it, but like, I might think I'm the friendliest guy ever, and people walk out of the room going, wow, that guy's a real jerk. Like he is just full of himself, and he's this and he's that, but I think I'm awesome. Right now, listen, I'm a believer in the church. I wouldn't be doing this podcast if I wasn't a believer in the local church. I wouldn't be involved in the local church. I wouldn't give to the local church. I believe that the church is really the hope of the world. I really believe that Jesus is using the church. But we have some obstacles to overcome. Okay. Any final thoughts before we bring Jeff on, Joe?
Yeah, I just want to echo what you just said, Carey. Something that that David's been saying for a long time is that we need to preach and proclaim a gospel in a way where people come to know that it's not just true, but that it's good. And, Carey, that's an echo of what you just said, that our self-awareness, I think sometimes we're so concerned about convincing people of what is true and convincing people to believe a certain way that sometimes we don't realize, and recognize the tone of which we communicate is really important in how we share the good news of the gospel. So just an encouragement to our audience. I want to say, people are still clinging to hope. They still look to the church for hope. And I really believe overall the church has done a really good job serving the community, serving the poor, promoting a positive view of the church, but we still have work to do. And that's what at Barna, we want to help church leaders. We want to come alongside church leaders to help us proclaim a good gospel to those in our communities.
I don't know where this saying originated, but if you don't hear it as good news, it's not the gospel, right? Like fundamentally, as hard as it is sometimes to deal with sin and all of that, it's still fundamentally good news. Well, Joe Jensen is the Vice President of Church Engagement at Barna. And Joe, thanks for joining us today. And I'm going to call in Jeff Henderson now. Jeff, it is so good to be with you again. I just love hanging out. Jeff and I have been friends for a long time now, Jeff. And yeah, it's great to have you on the ChurchPulse Weekly podcast. Did I give your bio justice? Like, when you're really good friends, sometimes it's like, what would Jeff's bio be? But
friend of Tony Nieuwhof's. That's really my byline. So if you could add that in, that'd be great.
Okay, that's great. And husband to Wendy Henderson.
That's right.
So
that's right.
There you go. You're all set. Now you have a wonderful family, and you served first in marketing, which I thought was so helpful how many years were you a lead pastor? From 17. When to when?
17. Yeah. 17 years.
17 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Started
Buckhead Church in a grocery store, and then left that after 8 years when it was booming, and started all over again at Gwinnett Church, and it grew to 2 locations. And then it was the fall of 2020, you stepped out of that lead pastor role, kind of like I did a few years ago at Connexus, and moved into the next phase of your life. What are you spending your days doing these days, Jeff? Other than, sitting back, relaxing, enjoying the flight. I know that's not the case.
Well, I'm 2 years behind you, Carey, in everything I do. So I finally left the lead pastor role. But really, before COVID hit, I really began to see a lot of churches implementing what you and Joe were talking about. Hey, we want to be known for what we're for. But then when the book came out, I went on a book tour, and I saw a lot of businesses really respond to this. And I feel like I'm called right now to help serve the business world, but also in the church world, and with this particular message about for. So I love going back and forth like you do, serving the church world and then running over here and serving the business world, because I think God's doing great work on both of those venues. And so I love being able to go back and forth between the church and business worlds.
Well, and I hinted at it earlier, but if people don't know where the whole #4 thing came from, because you do see it in businesses across America, churches across America, around the world, literally, we're for Barrie, we're for Aurelia, you're for Toronto, you're for Seattle. I mean, right. I see it everywhere I travel. Jeff, that started with you and your team, which is pretty amazing and it kind of went viral without you trying to make it go viral. It just sort of caught on, and it's all over. So when you hear the data that Joe shared, what's your reaction to that? Did anything surprise you? Did anything concern you? What did you hear, Jeff?
Well, the good news, and Joe pointed this out, it's not all bad news.
Right.
So it's great. I mean, 44% have a positive view of the church. So to come out of what we've all been through, not only with the pandemic, but particularly in America with the elections. So there's a lot of positive news. So that's great. I do share your concern and Joe's concern about the rising indifference toward the church. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it, Carey, earlier. But if you have a brand and you have a customer that's indifferent to your brand, it's a hard conversation. For example, let me give you an example from my former life in the restaurant business. So at Chick-fil-A, everybody came there for lunch, but there were a lot of people that didn't understand that you could eat chicken for breakfast. The concept of a chicken biscuit was foreign to them. They were indifferent to the chicken biscuit. So we had to do an extraordinary amount of work just to get considered for breakfast, because people were indifferent to chicken for breakfast. But once you did, it took off. So I think we've got to pay attention to this indifference research, because I think it's growing. And we could have the best preaching, the best ministry, the best kids programs, the best digital offerings. But if they are indifferent, it's going to be like a chicken biscuit. I don't eat chicken for breakfast, so that's not for me.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and again, I want to tap into your 17 years experience as a lead pastor as well. But you're right. Indifference is if your car breaks down, you've got to buy a new car.
Right.
But if you don't know about Hyundai or General Motors, or you never think about Honda or Toyota because they just don't register, then you're not thinking of them as an option in the same way that for years, people didn't think of Chick-fil-A as a breakfast place. They thought of it. So they're thinking breakfast, they're thinking bacon and eggs, cereal, oatmeal, right? Like the last thing I'm going to do is do Chick-fil-A for breakfast. So you have an indifference issue. And does that really go to the heart of like, people just don't think about you?
I think it does. And
Okay.
I think there's a mindset that says, you're just not a category for me. I can't find what I'm looking for with you. Now, go back to the research Joe just talked about. Another positive attribute here is that many people, a good portion of them, believe that hope can still be found at the church.
Yes.
So people need to eat breakfast, So let's put chicken biscuits on their radar screen and on their level of consideration. People still need hope. But what they're bumping up against is the research that Joe just mentioned, that almost 50% of people are more familiar with what the church is against rather than what the church is for. And so the hope meter at that point becomes indifferent to them because they don't know that the church is for anything. So there's no hope there. And so again, I think there's a lot of positive news here, but we've got some work to do as it relates to the indifferent front. In fact, when we started Gwinnett Church, Carey, from the very beginning, I told our staff that, hey, years from now, if we decide to close down Gwinnett Church and say it's been a great run, we're going to sell all the property and give all the money away to charity, I would want the community to rise up in protest and say, if you close down, our community will suffer. There are many churches that will close this year and the community will never know it. They'll just drive right on by because there was no difference that was coming out of those four walls to the community. And so we've got to change that indifference because and to do that, you have to add value to the community.
So my mind, and maybe this is a mistake, but my mind tends to gravitate toward the 44% that would be indifferent to the church and to those who would say that we're more known for what we're against, not what we're for, et cetera. How did you encounter that on the ground at Buckhead and at Gwinnett Church? So for people who may know that context in Atlanta, those neighborhoods were very different. I mean, Buckhead is sort of the upscale, richer area of Atlanta. And then Gwinnett was more like Suburbsville or like describe those communities and how you encountered those attitudes as a pastor, Jeff.
They are different. Buckhead's probably more young single, Carey, and
Gotcha.
Gwinnett is probably more family. And yet Gwinnett, interestingly enough, is the most diverse county in the southeastern United States.
Oh,
and
that's great.
It'll be the most populated county in Georgia. So huge potential. But whenever I walk around the park, and I'm usually texting you, by the way, when I'm walking, and I hear all these different languages, right? So
truly diverse, like from all over the world.
Oh, incredible.
More like New York than what you would expect.
Absolutely. So there is I knew from the very beginning, because of there are some cultural gaps that would immediately introduce indifference. And yet we began with a question that I was really taught with at Chick-fil-A. And that is, any business, any organization needs to ask the question, what do we want to be known for? What do you want to be known for? And you can't be known for 85 things. It's anytime I go to a restaurant and they have a menu of about 72 pages, I'm like, you can't do all of this really well. There's no way to source the ingredients. There's no way to do all this training. What are the one or two or three things that you want to be known for? And when we asked that question in the early days of church planning around North Point, our team, particularly at Gwinnett, said, well, I think, many people are more familiar with what the church is against. And that just broke my heart because I knew it was true. I didn't have the great data that Barna had at the time. I just knew intuitively from an experiential standpoint, I knew that was true. And that the greatest message the world has ever heard and will ever hear has somehow gotten mixed up in bad messaging. And so that's when we decided, okay, we're going to go in on this for message. And so we asked the question, then who are we for? And I think that's a question any organization needs to ask is, who are we playing for? You know, the Atlanta Braves, the local baseball team in Atlanta, they do for the A, meaning that they're for the city of Atlanta. And they're saying, hey, here's who we're playing for. We're playing for our city. Well, I think any organization, whether it's church or business or nonprofit, whatever it may be, we need to ask the question, who are we playing for? And yes, in church, we are playing for Jesus. I totally get all that. But I think it's the people that I was walking around this park with, hearing these different languages going, no, I'm playing for them too. And I want to create a church that is open to them, and we got to go after them.
So when you had different generations respond to the For initiative, and I think it's fairly well known from people in the church space, but like when you were building Gwinnett Church, you didn't have the coming soon Gwinnett Church, you just hashtag for Gwinnett.
Right.
And that was intentionally ambiguous, but you wanted people to know that there was something that was for them, that was coming into the community. When you watch the generations respond to that, how did you see millennials in particular respond to a positive message that seemed to be anchored in hope?
They jumped in.
Yeah.
And they were asking the question in kind of a hopeful question, Carey, such as, this isn't a marketing slogan. We're really doing this, right? I mean, because they thought, is this
a little suspicious? Yeah.
Right. You're a marketing guy, Jeff. You have a marketing background, but is this like is this an ad campaign, or are we really going to be for our community? And that's what I noticed with the younger generation, is they were saying, we love it. We just want to make sure that they were kind of dipping their toe in the water before they jump in. Like, is this really real? Or is this going to go on for about 6 months and you're going to move on to the next campaign? Is this a fundraising campaign, or is this really real? Right. And when they began to see, no, here's our nonprofit partners, here's how we're going to help local schools, here's actually how we're going to help local businesses. And I think this is different in each community, Carey, but we came up with some specific initiatives with some specific communities in mind. One of which, for example, was the business community. I began to notice that a lot of times, and you do such a great job of this, of bringing the gospel to the business community in a helpful way. But I began to see that, there are a lot of businesses and churches, they don't talk to one another. And it's that indifference thing. It's not a hostility thing. It's just, I think business leaders go, what could I possibly learn from a pastor? And I think sometimes pastors are intimidated by business leaders. Mm-hmm. And so we decided one of the ways we're going to be for Gwinnett is we're going to start highlighting local businesses on our Instagram page and tell our church, go have breakfast at this place, go support this business leader. And that was a way for us to be for Gwinnett. So to your question, when the younger generation began to go, oh, this isn't just a campaign, an ad campaign or a marketing slogan to get people to come to church. This is adding value to the community. They were all bought in, and they were more passionate about it than anybody. In fact, the younger you went, Carey, the more passionate they got.
That's fascinating to me, Jeff. So yeah. So, and if you followed the Instagram feed of Gwinnett Church when Jeff was a leader, there was some really cool stuff. Like, I remember you went into a local donut shop one day and just said, hey, go support, I don't know, Wendy's Donuts or whatever it was. And you just picked businesses, and they weren't necessarily associated with your church, right? They were just people from the community that you decided to get in the corner of. Can you give us some more practical examples? Because I think you're right. It would be easy for me to get a whole bunch of signs printed up, some t-shirts printed up that said for whatever my community is, for Oro Medonti in my case, but like it'd be a PR slogan, and it would mean nothing, right? So if you're really going to be for a community and for a city, what does that look like?
Well, I had an advantage because I grew up in Gwinnett County. My dad pastored a church in Gwinnett County, so I've been in love with this county for a long time. Wendy grew up in this county. She's been in love with this county for a long time. So we have deep, deep roots here. But even if I had not, and you're a church planner, Carey, as a church planner, one of the dangers is that you get stuck and you remove yourself from the community. So when Connexus moved into your location, your permanent location, or when Buckhead Church moved into a permanent location, or Gwinnett Church moved into its permanent location, I could suddenly get stuck in meetings 5 days a week, all day, because we got to run the machine, right? So one of the things I was very intentional about is carving out time to get in my car and go meet people, particularly in this case, business leaders. And so I walked in and met Carissa Norfleet, the owner of Simply Done Donuts, who you just referenced. Just introduced myself. She didn't go to our church, but I said, hey, can you tell me about your business? She told me about her business, ups and downs, which you're an entrepreneur. You and I know the ups and downs of entrepreneurs. And I just said, can I bring my leadership team in next week to sit down and you just share your story? So she did that. And then I said, can we feature you on our Instagram page to help people, buy donuts? And she said, well, sure, but how much does it cost? I said, it doesn't cost anything. Do you want me to put flyers in the donut shop to support people? Tell people to come to Gwinnett Church. That'd be nice, but no, I don't want you to do that. And then she asked the question, which I loved, Carey, which is, why are you doing this? Why are you?
I love that question too, Jeff.
And that just tees it up to, well, because we're for you. We're genuine. There's no now. We're for you because we believe that one of the best things that you can do for our community is to run a thriving business, because we believe you're going to hire great people. You're going to train them. Some of these folks, you're going to give them their first job. A high school student will be their very first job will be at Simply Done Donuts. But for that to happen, you got to sell more donuts. And when that happens, it helps our community. We are genuinely and authentically for our community and for Gwinnett. So for me, I just wanted, and that happened all the time, Carey, just constantly going out and introducing myself to people. And you know this about me, I'm an introvert. So this was a little hard for me to do. But it has to come back to a genuine, are you for your community? And does it genuinely bother you that 31% are indifferent to the church and 44% are more familiar with it being what it's against rather than it's for? When that bothers you and you get local in your community, you can make a difference.
What was it? Was it Carissa? What was her reaction when you told her and you got through all of her little asterisks where she's like, well, do I have to put up signs? How much does it cost? What was her reaction or other reactions that you got?
So it was just really, so there's no strings attached. And I said, no. And I said, now we would like for you to put on a For Gwinnett shirt, but it doesn't have anything to do with our church. But if you could do that, and they go, oh, absolutely. But what that did for me is, again, if you're not careful in church world, you can just, the people that you do life with are all Christians. And this allowed me to intentionally reach out to people and help them in the little bit of way that I could. But what I loved about that, Carey, is 2 years later, she and her fiance Joey came to the Christmas Eve service.
Wow.
And she accepted Jesus. And so all of that is wonderful. But again, but even if that did not happen, we still want to support your business.
It was still a win.
Right. And I think too, it helped recast the vision to our church, because I get these questions all the time from pastors. Hey, what if I highlight one donut, but there's another donut shop owner in our church?
I was going to ask you that.
How does all that work? And I'm like, hey, look, we can get through all that. We can work through all of that. But I love what our mutual friend, Andy Stanley, says, do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. And we intentionally did not church, and maybe we should have done this, I don't know. We didn't intentionally start with business people inside our church. We wanted to go outside so that there were no strings attached, if you will. And so, but I didn't want that to stop us. And the same thing was with schools. We really highlighted in Gwinnett County, sports. Jesus is Lord, but sports is God, because everybody thinks their high school kid is going to make it to the pros, right? So they start out really young. So we really highlighted, because of that, and because of in the state of Georgia, of the 10 largest high schools in the state of Georgia, 8 were in Gwinnett County.
Wow.
So for us to contextualize and go, okay, how are we going to reach this community, our particular community, which might be a little bit different from Barry or Los Angeles or whatever, we got to reach high school students. We're going to focus on high school sports, and we're going to turn our Twitter page primarily into basically just talking about high school sports. I mean, yes, we'll tell you what's happening on Sunday, and yes, here's what's going on in kids ministry, but more often than not, we're going to be talking about high school sports. And what I loved about that is that so often these public high schools would retweet a church, our church, and put it on their Twitter page.
That's unreal.
Not because we were talking about us, but because we were talking about them. And that's what we got so much favor and credibility with these schools, because they know, oh, we can trust these people because their hearts are in the right place. They're cheering our students on, and they're supporting us on their Twitter page.
You know, that's so encouraging, Jeff. And what I'm hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, Gwinnett Church went on, you planted it from scratch, but it went on to become a large church, and it's part of North Point Ministries. But this isn't like a $10,000 budget. This could be like a free Instagram account on your phone. Is that like where you start with the 4 initiative? Like, you don't have to have big bucks. You don't have to have a big team. Like, is it basically a free strategy?
Absolutely. And,
Wow.
you know, I mean, I know Chick-fil-A is a multi-billion-dollar company, but when I was at Chick-fil-A, compared to McDonald's, we were really small. And so we called our marketing street fighter marketing. We would go out on the street, hand out coupons, do, you know, local events, local versus kind of air coverage where you have this national TV. So that's kind of how I was born and bred within marketing. Well, that's the approach I really just took as a church planner. Is I'm gonna be scrappy, because I know this about money. I mean, money's important, but money does not usually lead to more creativity. It's the limits. It's the how are we going to outthink versus, you know, outspend. And that kind of creativity. And the other thing I would do, Carey, is I would pretend, I do this all the time. I would pretend that I were you. And here's what I mean by this. I would pretend that I was a strategic partner church, that while I was connected to North Point, I didn't have the budget of North Point.
Right.
And I would ask myself, what would
drop a few zeros in front of that decimal point, right?
Right. But I could sleep at night knowing that I was attached to North Point. But so I just thought like that. I got no money, but I can launch an Instagram page, and it doesn't cost me anything, and we can be scrappy. And that scrappiness led to a lot of the ideas that a lot of churches are doing now. And it didn't really cost anything. And now we would buy t-shirts. T-shirts are an investment, but I didn't see it as t-shirts. I saw that as walking billboards in the community. And the other thing I would tell church leaders as well, and I hope, Carey, you know this, I feel like I'm a nice guy. I'm not as Canadian nice as you are.
No, I think you're nicer than I am. So, for the record, Jeff.
So let me, with that as a preface, let me push church leaders. Too often, I think we hide behind money as an excuse.
Yeah.
If I had the money, I would do this. Well, first of all, you don't necessarily need the money to be more creative. But if you need the money, go find it. When's the last time you sat down with somebody over coffee or either over a Zoom call and said, hey, I want to give, you know, for Los Angeles. I mean, I saw somebody launch for Sacramento this weekend. When was the last time? And they did a great job, so I'm not picking on them. When's the last time you sat down and said, hey, I need 500 for Sacramento t-shirts, but I don't have in my budget. Can you pay for the t-shirts? I mean, if you get scrappy like that, you can make this happen. So don't hide behind we don't have money in our budget excuse.
Yeah. The other thing I saw, because I had the privilege of being at your staff meeting a couple of times and actually participating in this, because you invited me in to speak to your team.
Yeah.
But it blew me away because you spend, what was it, 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of a staff meeting on a fairly regular basis, encouraging everyone in the room. And you can, if you don't have staff, you can do this with volunteers. It's basically just people. But can you walk us through the playbook of how to be for your community on social media rather than just, you know, posting hashtag for Tulsa? Mm-hmm. Like what do you do with your team? Because I thought that was ingenious.
Well, first of all, the overarching principle is don't forget the social in social media. I see this all the time. So, and you do a phenomenal job of being social in social media. what that means is a lot of organizations, and when I'm in front of a lot of big brands, multi-billion-dollar brands, and I tell them that they don't do social media, they just lose their minds. They're like, look, I can show you our Instagram page right now. I'm like, no, I'm not saying you don't, you're doing digital media. You're forgetting the social in social media. And so much of our social media strategy at Gwinnett Church, many people wouldn't see, but many people felt it because it was directed at them. What I mean by that is what you're referencing. We would start every staff meeting by going to Instagram, searching #4Gwinnett, and all of our staff would be liking and commenting to the folks that had done something around our church or something with 4Gwinnett, or they're out there with their t-shirt supporting it. And we would just be very social. And then it would clue me in on what was going on in people's lives. So when I saw them on Sunday or saw them in the neighborhood, say, oh, by the way, how was your vacation at Disney World? Which may seem a little stalker-esque, but I think they were also like, wow, our pastor knows that we went to, Disney World for vacation. And so for me, the other overarching strategy is I wanted to grow a small church. I wanted to grow small. What does that mean? I wanted to grow as large as we possibly could, at the same time still have that small church feel that everybody knows me and that they see me and the pastor sees me. And for me, social media allowed me to do that. And so the fact that we were leaving our platform at Gwinnett Church and interacting with people on their platform. And then when I would do that personally and say, hey, cheering you on or praying for you, or I see what's going on in your life. When I left last year, the overarching thing I heard, Carey, was thank you for making this church feel small, because I felt known. And that's something that social media helps you do. Again, that's that first word, social media. And I mean, yes, does social media have its issues? Oh my goodness. This is another podcast. Yes. But I do believe it's an opportunity for churches and church leaders and staff and volunteers to show the community that we see you, we hear you, we believe in you, and we are for you. And so lifting off of our platforms and engaging with people on their platform, that's a game changer, because people feel it and they love. In fact, people would tell me, I can always tell when the Gwinnett Church staff meeting is, because my Instagram feed starts blowing up. Now, there are a lot more strategies, but that's really the overarching premise, is that to leverage the social in social media and make sure that your social media approach is dialogue, not monologue. And that it's just, here it comes. And again, you do a great balance about that. Here's helpful content. Here's helpful content. And then somebody posts back and you're like, hey, you like her coming back. Again, can you do it for everybody? No, but do for one what you wish you could do for everyone.
And you would comment too on things that weren't church related at all, if I remember correctly, Jeff, and correct me if I'm wrong, but let's say somebody who used the #4Gwinnett on their profile, and you'd come across them and it's like, hey, my son had the winning touchdown at the, junior high football game on the weekend or something like that. It wouldn't be uncommon for you or one of your team to say, way to go. Like, just like commenting on their life or congratulations on whatever they were celebrating in that moment. Is that true?
Absolutely. And again, I think especially as pastors, people don't think we have a real life. That's all we do. It's like when you're growing up and you saw your teacher in the grocery store and you're like, what? You're actually outside.
They're real people. How did that happen?
Right.
Yeah.
So when you comment about something about real life, it just, I guess you're a real person too. And you genuinely care for me. And the other thing too is, and I think we've got to do a better job at this. Ultimately, I think the play for the church isn't necessarily either physical or digital to just, create these content people that all they do is they just consume content, but that the content in our ministry and what we're doing actually helps them in their lives so that they go out into the community and they are living a Christ-filled life, and people ask them, what's different about you? And so I think encouraging people in all aspects of their life and modeling what it looks like to genuinely love people and to be for them and to bring a positive message to the community. I just think it's so helpful and so important. And so I would do that all the time. And, for our high school ministry, our high school students, I mean, anytime they're heading toward the soccer championship, hey, way to go, way to go. We're cheering you on. And all of this is bringing a value add to the community to go, wow, this church, and again, this is, I think, what drew the younger generation in. Oh, they're actually leveraging their, in this case, social media capital and inventory, if you will, to talk more about the community than they are about the church.
Okay, Jeff, as we wrap up, I would love to talk about marketing do's and don'ts. So this has been a really positive interview, which is a refreshing breath of fresh air. But there are probably some things churches do that you're like, I wouldn't do that. If you're hiring me as your consultant or talking to me as your friend, I would tell you stay away from those things. What are some don't do's for church marketing?
I think particularly as it relates to 4, I would be careful, and I understand why, but I would be careful not to, for example, let's just take t-shirts, right? I'm a big believer in t-shirts, by the way, but I wouldn't put for Gwinnett and then GwinnettChurch.org. I would just do for Gwinnett. I would just lead with that message. One of the things we did is we put these little car magnets on the back of cars, or I handed them out and said, hey, put them on the back of your car when you go through the drive-through occasionally. Just pay for the person behind you. We call it pay it backwards. We'd be tempted to put for Gwinnett, GwinnettChurch.org. I wouldn't do that. Not a big thing, but to me, that smacks a little bit of, oh, there's an agenda here. Are you really, or is this what is this? And so I would stay true to the message. I also, huge marketing don't. We had to get better at this at Gwinnett Church. And I'm not sure we quite got there before I left. Is as great as social media is, email is still king if you have a email strategy. So the marketing don't is don't send emails if you don't have a strategy. And one of the things we had to do is we just had to, for a while, I just shut down the funnel. I mean, because people were getting all kinds of variety, Sunday's coming, we got a new CD coming, there's a new book out, there's, all of this stuff. It was just
all the promo.
It was a super highway of confusion. So we stopped it and said, we're going to revisit our email strategy, and we're going to have audiences. The first audience is going to be for people who are new. We're going to have a different email strategy for them. Because what was happening, Carey, is if you came to Gwinnett Church and you signed up for something, you were immediately put in the email superhighway funnel and you started getting everything. Then there's a separate email stream for volunteers. Then there was a separate email stream for the church. And then we wanted to create an email strategy so that we could collect more and more emails. But to do that, you would have to have a value add strategy. So we completely rewrote our email strategy. And then suddenly, our email list just grew and grew and grew, and we were adding value. And our email strategy actually connected to our year-end giving strategy, which sent our year-end giving strategy through the roof based on our email strategy. So the marketing don't there is don't do email until you have an email strategy. And you write so much about this too, in your current disruptions. But I would be really, really careful about venturing into politics. It's been interesting.
That was going to be my next question. What about the constant senior pastor feed about this candidate, that candidate, this thing about coronavirus, that thing, every social issue, every Supreme Court decision? What do you think about that?
It's hard. I want to be careful. You and I have a heart for pastors, and I think one of the things that breaks our hearts is to see, pastors struggling. Suicide rates of pastors is just that breaks our hearts. I'm not coming down on pastors. I'm just saying let's be clear to stay on message. And we've got the great news is, and Joe's research is kind of playing this out. We've got the best message. That's for God so loved the world. So leaders are repeaters. I just feel like if we stayed on message about that, it would be a game changer. And my concern is when we get into the political arena, it's a no-win. It's a no-win situation. And, I was still right up until the election. I left in September and the election is in November. So I was, people were interpreting, like we did a National Ice Cream Month thing and we featured Jenny's ice cream. And then I get feedback like, Jeff, we need you to stay out of politics. I'm like, what are you talking about? When Jenny supports Joe Biden, I'm like, no, this has nothing to do with ice cream. Politics, this is everything to do with ice cream, right? So everything that I was doing was being interpreted as, oh, I know who you're voting for now. So I live that world, I just don't want to add fuel to that. And, it's interesting to me. I've seen a lot of political candidates now starting to do 4. So I'm not quite sure what to think about that. But anyway, it's a whole other separate.
So you've had that, right? You've had different candidates for office, like we're for Georgia, for whatever.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then I would be careful if you're going to preach on a topic, make sure that you have someone that you are doing life with that might get offended by that topic, that you can have a conversation with before you preach that sermon. And again, that's going to be what you feel the Lord is calling you to preach on. That's between you and the Lord, and who am I to talk about that? But at the end of the day, I wanted to create such a wide funnel of people who could come into our doors. And then as the Lord chisels away things at my heart, it's going to chisel away things at your heart. But we're going to be in this together, and we are for one another. And this community is going to get stronger together. But I wanted to create the funnel as wide as I possibly can to let the community know that, no, we are genuinely for you. Now, at some point, we're going to have disagreements about who Jesus is and what the Bible says, but we're going to do it within the context of love.
Well, and I think what you saw at Hamilton Mill and also at Gwinnett Church, and certainly at Buckhead too, is that you had people on both sides of the political aisle, people of different, like your church started to reflect the diversity of the community. Is that fair?
And you had to remember that. You had to remember that. I mean, you can preach your way to a political party, church. I mean, that's really easy to do. You can do that, but it's harder to create a system where everybody believes at the end of it, not a system, create an environment where people are, okay, I don't know who or what what candidate they're voting for, but I do understand at the end of the day, it's about the kingdom. It's about Jesus. And I think they are genuinely, authentically for me. And there's hope here. And again, that goes back to Joe's research, is that if people feel like the church is a place for hope, then we need to be delivering that. Now, I do think, as you look at some of the research too that Barna has been doing, the younger the demographic goes, the more that they're asking the question, what is the church doing in our community, and what are you doing to make a difference? That's not just true for the church. It's actually true for the business world as well. I was with a friend of mine who's the global marketing director of a huge brand. And he said, Jeff, this is both convicting and encouraging, but the younger our demographic goes in terms of marketing research, the more the younger demographic is asking us, what are you doing to help make the world a better place? And if you don't have a good answer for that, I think we're going to go elsewhere to do business.
Right. And that whole ethical shopping, right? Like, where was this clothing made? And what is your carbon neutrality standpoint? And were there animals harmed in the testing of this makeup? All that stuff, right? That is a real thing.
It's growing higher and higher and higher. And here's the great news for the church. For one of the rare times, we're ahead of the business world. And here's why I say this. I think we got a better answer than any business. Oh, you want to know what the world... You know who's first to show up at a disaster? Typically the church. Do you know who's taking care of more foster kids around the world? It's people that follow Jesus. Do you know who's serving more hungry people around the world than any group in the world? It's Christians. We have a great answer to the question. I just feel like sometimes we take our great answers and we bury it under against language. And I'll give you an example. This morning, I mean, not to get on this diatribe, you can edit this out if you want to, Carey, but Apple News, it's talking about the Southern Baptist Convention and about what's going to happen this week. All right, now, not making a comment about that. Here's my point. Of all the incredible things that the Church of Jesus is doing around the world, that was the headline on Apple News. Now, people like to trend toward, controversy and all that sells. I totally understand that. But I'm telling you, we are sitting on massive amount of goodwill. And if we're not careful, we can squander it with one tweet and one soundbite.
Jeff, that's so good. Any final thoughts for church leaders who are saying, I want to be known for what we're for, and I want to diffuse the indifference and the cynicism that's out there about the church? What's a final thought for them? And then I want to know where we can find your current work and all the things that are about being for our community.
Well, thanks, Carey. I think it comes down to two things. Continue to just love Jesus and continue to fall in love with your community. Just love these people. Because when you go in, for example, and have a conversation with a person who left AT&T to help start a donut shop, and now she's in this, she's put a lot of her life savings on the line, and you're sitting here as a church pastor and saying, we want to help you, and you see the tears in her eyes, and you're like, I want to do this every single day. I just want to help people as much as I can in my own little way, in my own little world, and I just fall in love with the people in your community. And I think this helps answer the question. It's a great question, and you've helped so many of us, Carey, understand the balance between physical and digital. But ultimately, for me, the balance is not physical or digital; it's local. I think that's where the local church is going to have its greatest impact. So, in fact, you go to a restaurant, you go to a grocery store like Whole Foods here in America. Do y'all have Whole Foods up in Canada?
We will, I'm sure. I think they do in Toronto now. Yeah.
Okay.
Not here in the country.
When you go around, you'll see this little sign. I would love for you to count how many times you see this word. It's called local. Local source. Local. There's something valuable about local. So again, here's another advantage of the church. The local church has an advantage right now, but don't get sucked into the business of the church so much that it takes you away from the local people and trust me, both Carey and I know systems, and here comes Sunday totally get all that, and have the systems and the resources in place. But I think if you continue to love Jesus and continue to fall in love with the people in your community, then the for strategy isn't a marketing campaign. It's from your heart.
Oh, that is such a good place to stop. And I agree with you, Jeff. To paraphrase another mutual friend, Reggie Joyner, who taught me years ago that nobody should be able to out community the local church. I've been saying nobody should be able to out local the local church, right? That's an advantage you have over every mega church, over everybody who's got 1 million followers on Instagram, is who's in your town, who's in your village, who's in your county, who's in your neighborhood. Just before them, and you're going to be okay. It's going to work out.
Yeah. I'll give you a quick example. When we launched Hamilton Mill, it's much smaller. It went kind of full circle. It was a former grocery store as well, which is where it started at Buckhead. And but the reason I felt like Hamilton Mill was the right thing is it's one of the things I told North Point. I said, hey, I think in the future, small is the new big. And if you can figure out small and systematize it in such a way, so you take all the great advantages of megachurch world, but you extrapolate it into a smaller context. If you can figure that out financially, that's the ball game. That's the future, because small is the new big. And I think we're seeing that play out right now.
Oh, that's so good. Okay, so people want to know about the For Initiative. They want to find you. Where would they do that online these days, Jeff?
Well, so Carey, here I am talking a big game, like, hey, you need to be local. And so here, I just want to give them my email address. So just email me. If you got questions, it's just Jeff@the4company, FOR.com. And I'll email you back. And if I can, one of the things I'm trying to do is to, now that hopefully, your borders open and we'll get back out into the road. I sure hope I can see you in person again soon.
Soon.
I'm trying to take this message back out on the road. So, just email me. One of the things I love doing, Carey, I love preaching on Sunday on the For message, then sticking around and doing a business breakfast, talking about for business leaders, a way for the church to say, hey, if you have ever wanted to invite your coworkers to church, but felt a little odd about the Sunday thing, just invite them on Monday. We're going to be talking about business. So email me at jeff@the4company.com. Would love to help, and continuing to cheer what you all are doing, and Barna and the team, and David and Joe.
Well, Jeff, every time we get together, which is a lot. It's such a joy, and this was no exception. And I learned some things again. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you to every leader for being with us today. We're in your corner, and without paraphrasing Jeff too much, we're for you, and that's why we do this week after week. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, share it with a friend, let us know, let Jeff know on social. You're on Instagram all the time, Jeff, so we really appreciate that. And thanks to our partners. We really appreciate Replicate. Today's Church Pulse Weekly is brought to you by Replicate Collective. It's a disciple-first tribe of church leaders who will help you fulfill you and your church's God-given potential. You can go to replicatecollective.com to apply for their next cohort. Spots are limited, and by Metashare. We're so grateful to them. Go to metashare.com/churchpulse to see how much you could be saving on health insurance by switching to their services. And most people save a lot. Well, we'll catch you next time on Church